Hello again, YouTube. Today we are fixing my Mini Cooper once again. It has 103,000 miles on it, 15% pulley on the supercharger, and I blew a Brisk spark plug out of my head, cylinder number 2 there. So I've already started working on it. I bought a tool which you can acquire at Discount Auto Parts. Now this tool doesn't naturally fit down the cylinder, the bore for the spark plug, so I had to cut it on a bench grinder to make it fit a 16mm socket. I got that tip off one of the forums. It wasn't too hard actually, just keep grinding away until it fits. I've stuffed this socket with some paper to locate this thing correctly, and then I put one piece of electrical tape around it, just kind of hold it there. You can't go crazy on the electrical tape because the 16mm barely fits down the bore. I've used this long rod here, this metal dowel, if you will, to just judge my piston depth right now, and then I've made a couple marks relative to the valve cover, so I know I'm not going to run into the piston. A lot of people said leave the piston all the way up. I was concerned the base of this tapered tap might run into the piston once it's fully thread at the larger threads. So I ran the piston down just a little bit. So this is almost like a depth gauge. I'd suggest finding anything that you can draw on as a depth gauge. So I'm tapping it. I'm using a technique loading it with grease. It's doing a fine job. If you look very closely there's some good chunks right there. A couple turns and then just back it out. And that will keep those chips from falling into the head. I'm also using a standard shop vac with a piece of tubing. I would suggest find the straightest piece of tubing you can so you can actually get it into the spark plug hole and down into the cylinder when you need to. But just a little bit of duct tape and a piece of tubing to vacuum any additional chips out. After that, let's just pray that a whole bunch doesn't get down in there. I looked down in there with a bright flashlight and it looked fine, so I'm not too concerned about chips in the engine. Just take your time, thread it a couple times and then back it out and clean the threads, re-grease, and step back at it again. Other than that, you should be able to put your car back together. I did read one forum that said it may have been Brisk spark plugs that were the issue. However, I used my caliper, and I just so happen to have my BMW factory NGK plugs still floating around. So I used my caliper to measure these, and they were identical, outer diameter and inner thread diameter, etc. So it's definitely not the spark plugs that are doing it. It's definitely poor manufacturing or possibly material selection between the spark plugs and the head itself. Maybe expansion rates is coming into play here and ruining the threads. But hopefully once this is done, we're going to put one of these little black adapters, the longer one preferably, into this cylinder in replace of the spark plug hole. It's going to be a larger hole there. I believe there's some sort of mechanism where you tap this into place so it locks in. The last couple threads seem to have some sort of just kind of like teeth on them, if you will. There we go. Yeah, there's a couple teeth on the last couple threads there. Those will be on top. You'll notice there's a little gap in there. That's for the spark plug seat. So make sure you put this in the proper direction, because the other side is all thread. This side's got a little step down for the spark plug seat. So you'll assemble that onto the spark plug, run the spark plug down in there with some red thread locker on the outside of this, not on the inside, because you'll never get your spark plug back. And hopefully it locks it in after a couple hours of drying time. But again, this is somewhat of an issue that seems to be popping up on these cars. And I would advise that if it does happen, try this first before taking the head apart. And good luck. I've also, P.S., I've heard rumor that cylinders 2 and 3 do this. So check your spark plugs, make sure they're tight. I don't know if that'll necessarily help, because I'm pretty convinced mine were. But you never do know. Alright, thanks a lot, YouTube.